What's up everyone, Soldier First Class here, and today's mission, we're going to be breaking down and doing an analysis of the Final Fantasy XVI reveal trailer. That's right, I finally get to say those words to you guys, and I am so happy. The PlayStation 5 event not only gave us the price of the PS5, but it also started off the show with a bang by revealing Final Fantasy XVI to the world. Also, keep in mind that any graphical flaws you may see can be attributed to it being an early build and a reveal trailer. Overall, the game looks great so far, and I've wanted another high fantasy setting for a long time now. We've also now learned that Hiroshi Takai from Final Fantasy XIV and The Last Remnant is the director of Final Fantasy XVI. To begin, as has been rumored for years at this point, Final Fantasy XVI is being handled by Creative Division 3, with Yoshi P finally admitting his involvement with the project. He let the fans know on Twitter that while he's still the producer and director of 14, he's also the producer of 16. We've also now gotten the reason why they hired Ryota Suzuki, as the combat is very Devil May Cry-esque in nature. You can also see some heavy influence from Final Fantasy XV in a few areas as well, especially the teleport ability in combat. Stylistically, the game looks like a souped-up version of Final Fantasy XIV too, and you can definitely tell it's the same team developing it. Final Fantasy XVI's trailer begins with a fire burning, and as it pans out into the main character's eyes, you can already see the Final Fantasy XIV influence in the character design. He features a very gruff look with a tattoo on the left side of his face. It then goes to a campfire with 4 men standing and sitting around it, all featuring the same tattoo. They begin discussing their target, which means they're probably assassins or they're hired mercenaries. They refer to the target as Shiva's Dominant, which has me believing that a Dominant is Final Fantasy XVI's version of summoners. The leader says that the only target is the Dominant. One of the men questions whether or not the target is even on the battlefield, and the main character begins to touch his tattoo. I'm also thinking that we're seeing some time skipping here, as the main character at one point looks to be in his late 20s to early 30s maybe, and then young, and then at the end of the trailer they show the older, gruffier looking version of the character again. This is reminiscent of games like Final Fantasy Tactics with the character Ramza, where you begin the game as a mercenary, but then play a lot of the game showing what led you to that point. While I don't believe that Final Fantasy XVI takes place in Ivalice, the story is drawing heavy Final Fantasy XII comparisons, and it does sound a little like a Yasumi Matsuno pen story. It then flashes to a large-scale battle, but it appears that these assassins don't really have loyalty to either side. Titan is summoned, and one of the party says that they've summoned their icon, referring to one side of the battle. Icons, spelled as you see on screen, are what they're calling summons in Final Fantasy XVI. Shortly after we see Titan, we get a good look at Shiva forming ice crystals and firing them at Titan. Titan swings his fist and destroys the ice crystals. It then shows one of the men from the party exploding in a blood spatter as a massive boulder falls on him. Which, by the way, it appears that blood is not going to be a big issue in Final Fantasy XVI, as there was quite a bit in this trailer, but we'll get to that later. We don't see the summoner for either Shiva or Titan, but they are at least tied to someone as opposed to being separate entities like gods. Icons are featured in Final Fantasy XIV as well, but are also known as primals in that game. We then see a new scene where the main character looks much younger and much more clean-cut. The setting for Final Fantasy XVI seems to be somewhat like The Witcher 3 in nature, and actually kind of looks like Witcher 3 to be honest. You can hear the Final Fantasy Prelude theme playing in the background, and it's a really beautiful version, which really reminds me of Final Fantasy XII's version of the track. While it's not actually confirmed that Masayoshi Soken is actually working on the soundtrack, it definitely sounds like his work if you listen close enough. The narrator, which is possibly the main character at this point, talks about something called the Mother Crystal and how their enemies will not give it up so easily. Final Fantasy XVI appears to be embracing the crystal roots of the franchise that made it so popular. We also see a little blonde boy whose mother tells him he shouldn't be outside, and it's kinda weird because she has her hand over her mouth when she's talking to him for some reason. It's then revealed that the boy's name is Joshua, and he appears to have a magical ability, which later in the trailer will make a lot more sense. The main character's hand is hurt, and a small light comes from Joshua's hand, healing the wound. The narrator then claims to be Joshua's guardian. We also get our first look at the chocobos of Final Fantasy XVI, as the main character is tending to one near a stable. The music then becomes darker, and we flash to our character fighting a goblin-looking creature. He dodges backwards from an attack, and as he continually attacks the enemy, magic-like auras begin to form around him and his weapon. He then fires a fire spell out of his hand at the end of this combo. It's unclear whether magical properties are tied to weapons or some sort of materia-like system, but it seems that magic will flow freely during combat. Just before the player goes to finish off the enemy, he teleports in a gold flash of light, which gave off heavy 15 vibes. One major thing I did notice was that the game features blood and a very healthy amount of it. When the player goes to stab the enemy to finish it off, blood spatters everywhere on the ground. I can't be for sure, but we may be looking at an M-rated Final Fantasy, but I'm still kinda doubting it. It does make me wonder though why 16 can have blood, but Final Fantasy VII Remake decided it wasn't okay for Genova's trail in the Shinra HQ. We can also see that the player leaves an image of himself when dodging backwards, which disappears when he charges forward again. It's unclear whether or not there will be a party system, but you can see another person fighting in the background behind the goblin. You can also see that air juggling and combos will be featured in the combat as well, giving us even more Devil May Cry style vibes. We then go to a short scene with a gray-haired man yelling at someone off screen. It's possible that these are the mercenaries from earlier who were refusing an order for some reason. It quickly cuts to a fight with a Malboro, bad breath and all, which appears to be a boss fight in the swamp. The atmosphere is very foggy with minimal light, which means the Malboro is right at home. The Malboro launches itself towards the player and attempts to attack it with its tentacles. The player is seen firing off fire magic at the Malboro while also dodging its sludge-like attacks and tentacles. We also see more of the glowing teleport ability that we saw earlier in the trailer. We then see a blonde woman with a smoking pipe, and she's discussing some major battle that they've had with a group she calls the Crusaders. The narrator at this point says that they cannot defend their nation from something called the Blight, which may be some kind of disease without the blessing of the Mother Crystal. Sounds a little bit like the Star Scourge from 15, and could be the reason the mother was holding her hand over her mouth earlier in the trailer. The next scene is of a Dragoon character flying through the air, and we quickly learn that we have to fight the Dragoon. The player character still looks young in this part of the trailer, and features a phoenix-looking wing for an attack. More teleport attacks are shown and the battle is eventually won. The Final Fantasy XVI gameplay seems really smooth and fast-paced, but also looks like you may need to still pick your spots. The narrator discusses that the Dragoon is a member of some empire and asks if this is the beginning of an invasion. Next up is a scene in what looks like the inside of a castle or a church. A lot of the architecture is very medieval in nature, and the game appears to take place in an almost Evil East type location. The game itself really gave me a lot of Final Fantasy Tactics and Final Fantasy XII style vibes as well. The player is seen fighting an enemy that looks like the common Coeurl enemy, which could now be a boss fight. The enemy can be seen using lightning abilities, and its entire body is enveloped in electricity, which is pretty common for this enemy type in Final Fantasy games. So it's hard to get a good frame stop, but here you can see that the player is using some kind of claw attack on this club-wielding enemy. I'm almost beginning to wonder if the player somehow becomes a blue mage, or is just that type of character anyway. There's quite a few attacks shown in the trailer that appear to be of an animal or summon-like nature. In the next scene, we see the little boy Joshua next to a man in red clothed armor. He turns and we see a man in similar colored armor swinging his sword. He kills the other man and blood spatters all over Joshua's face. Again, we're seeing a lot of blood for a modern Final Fantasy game, and it makes me wonder if they're going to get away with a T rating for this one. I would think blood on a kid's face would be automatic M rating, but I guess we'll see. I'm also thinking that since this is two characters with the same color armor, that either the one being killed is a traitor or the one doing the killing is a traitor. We now see the main character fighting against a staff-wielding enemy and a large phoenix-looking wing coming out of the player again. The room they're in is destroyed and on fire, and the two are fighting amongst the rubble. We see a little more of the air juggling combos and get a really good look at the staff enemy, which could be a magic-using priest of some sort. We also get a look at him fighting a knight-looking character with fists that look like they're made of stone. So either the main character is a blue mage, or he inherits powers from summons, or something similar. Since the battle system is directed by Ryota Suzuki from DMC5, we may be seeing our first glimpse at weapon and ability cycling. Next up, Joshua is seen sitting on the ground, his eyes red as he's surrounded by a group led by what appears to be a man he saw earlier in the trailer. A red glowing light begins to form around Joshua as we pan above him in the scene. The narrator mentions something about the Archduke's son and then says the Phoenix. Now this is where trailer magic may be coming into play here, because there's two ways to look at this. A man screams, "Joshua, stop this," and then the Phoenix flashes onto the screen. After a few seconds of Phoenix, we then see a man-like figure made out of a glowing red fire substance with bright yellow eyes. He explodes into a fiery beam of light, knocking back the man in front of it. This isn't the same man that was around Joshua, but this could all be the trailer magic as well. The man says, "A second icon of fire, that's impossible." And then we see what appears to be Ifrit rising from the castle walls. If I had to guess, I'm assuming that 4 major elements are represented, kinda like the 4 elemental crystals from previous games: fire, earth, ice, and wind. So when he says that there's 2 icons of fire, that's impossible, it must mean that there's only ever been one of each icon. This means that Ifrit has never before been seen in this world, which adds an interesting fold to the story. The reason I say there's 2 ways to look at this is because there's 2 outcomes I see from this. Joshua is Phoenix, or Joshua is Ifrit. Either way, he's a dominant or summoner, and Phoenix or Ifrit are his icons. If Joshua is Phoenix, then the scene where he heals the main character's hand makes a lot more sense, considering that Phoenix historically has healing powers. If Joshua is Ifrit, then he may actually be the villain we have to stop, and making the main character his protector in the beginning will make that all the much harder on us emotionally. For my official theory on the matter, I believe Joshua is Phoenix, but he hasn't learned to control his powers all the way yet. The reason for this is because the person that turns into Ifrit is a full-sized adult man, and Joshua is clearly a smaller preteen or teenage boy. That, and the different people that are there in each scene, cause me to believe that Joshua is actually Phoenix. The next screen states The Legacy of the Crystals, which appears to be a callback to the series' roots and also the game's themes. We then see a face-off inside a castle between Phoenix and Ifrit as the two size each other up. It then states following the legacy part that it has shaped our history. The next few scenes are very quick, so we'll break them down quickly. We see Phoenix spreading its wings in a flashy ball of light, a club-wielding enemy attacking the player, a flashback to a large-scale battle, and then Shiva and Titan charging after each other. The player character is seen in the air, in which it looks like he's about to land the killing blow on the Malboro. It's hard to tell exactly what's happening in this next shot, but Ifrit appears to be punching a ball-shaped force field, which could be one of Phoenix's abilities. The title screen then finishes with, "For long enough," to finally finish the sentence, "The legacy of the crystals has shaped our history for long enough." It's entirely possible that instead of collecting the crystals, you're tasked with destroying them so that they can't be used to harm anyone ever again. If I had to guess, I'd say the crystals will be super important in connection with the summons, and that you'll have to destroy all 4 crystals to be able to destroy the Mother Crystal. This might also be key in defeating this evil version of Ifrit. If you remember, in Final Fantasy XV, Ifrit was a summon that Arden used to attack Noctis, putting him in a villain-type role. Summons aren't always the hero, and it appears Ifrit is filling the villain role in 16 as well. There's then a scene of Ifrit ripping something apart with its claws, blood going everywhere. We don't see what it is, but I have a feeling that it's Joshua as the Phoenix. During this scene, you can hear someone screaming, "Joshua, wake up," as Ifrit continues to shred whatever it is to pieces. When they cut together audio for trailers, what's being said isn't always reflected in the actual in-game scene, so it's entirely possible that the screams are during the aftermath when Joshua is possibly dead. And it's definitely possible that it's the main character asking Joshua to wake up, which means he failed in his duty and could be a major part of the story going forward. The screen then fades to black, and after a few seconds, our main character is shown, and he states, "I'll kill you." It then transitions to what we can assume is an older time-skip version of the main hero, and finishes the sentence with, "If it's the last thing I do." It then transitions the main logo for the game, which is Phoenix and Ifrit in combat. Since all Final Fantasy logos represent something within the narrative, I'm assuming that Ifrit kills Phoenix and Joshua is left dead. The scenes of the main protagonist and the bright colorful locations are like a prelude to the actual events of the story, and the first act of the story could be these prelude scenes. Like I said earlier, I'm getting heavy Yasumi Matsuno vibes, but he's confirmed via Twitter that he's not involved with the project at all. However, Joshua is a name from a character in Vagrant Story, another Matsuno written game. But it's likely because Kazutoyo Meihiro is the writer, and he learned under Matsuno on Tactics, Vagrant Story, and Final Fantasy XII. In the same tweet thread where Matsuno confirmed he's not involved, he also revealed that Meihiro is the writer, which is kinda funny since Square Enix didn't even release this information. His works also include being the main scenario writer on Final Fantasy XIV and Heavensward, and director of scenarios and events from both Stormblood and Shadowbringers. With Final Fantasy XIV being one of the best written games in Final Fantasy, this was an absolute genius writer to get for the game. It also explains the heavy Matsuno influence you can feel in this game's story. After this build-up, there's a time skip or something similar, and our main character is now a mercenary like he was in the beginning of the trailer. While he is a mercenary, he might be using this occupation to learn and grow, and as a way to be involved in a war that likely follows Joshua's death. This would make a lot of sense narratively, because the main character was at one time Joshua's guardian. If he's looking for revenge, he's going to need to learn and grow to defeat whoever is controlling Ifrit. The war between Ifrit and Phoenix is shown in the logo, which sets the basis for the story. Overall, while we didn't get an extreme amount of information, we still got quite a bit. Summons are super important to the story again, which I'm extremely excited about, and the game is going back to its roots in terms of setting and storytelling. The action-based combat looks slick, and I'm hoping it will be in the difficulty range that Final Fantasy VII Remake was, and less like 15 was. I really enjoyed what I saw, and I'm really glad that a mainline Final Fantasy is heading back to its roots of medieval-type settings. We've gotten a lot of modern and futuristic settings in recent years, and it's nice to go back for a change of pace. It's a big reason why games like Final Fantasy Tactics, Final Fantasy IX, and Final Fantasy XII have remained popular over the years. But I'll leave it up to you in the comments section below. Soldiers, are you hyped for Final Fantasy XVI, its medieval setting, and an important focus on summons? Thanks for watching, and don't forget to omni-slash that like button. Let me know in the comments section below if you're excited for Final Fantasy XVI. Subscribe to the channel and ring that notification bell to join the ranks of Soldier today. And for all the latest Final Fantasy XVI news, rumors, and trailers, I'm Soldier First Class, and I'm on to the next mission. Later, guys.